האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Good evening, Erev Tov, Dober V'Yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Korach. We're going to do Os Test, section number 9. Before we do, we're going to take a look at a pasuk from the Parsha. This is Perek Yud Zayin, pasuk Hey, again, right from our Parsha, Parshas Korach. Zikaron Livnei Yisrael. This will be a memorial for the people of Israel, the children of Israel. Lema'an, in order, asher lo yikrav ish zar, that no person who is a stranger will come close. Asher lo mizera Aharon, who? What does it mean he's a stranger? That he is not from the lineage, the descendants of Aharon. Lehaktir ketores lifnei Hashem, to bring incense, to burn incense in front of Hashem. V'lo yiyeh chekorach v'cha'adoso, and he will not, no person will be like Korach and his followers, his group. Ka'asher diber Hashem biyad Moshe lo, like that which Hashem said in the hand of Moshe about him. There's an argument who the him is here in the pasuk. Rashi says the him is referring to Aharon, and the pasuk means to say that everyone should remember what happened with Korach, because Korach was trying to go against what Hashem had told Moshe about him, meaning about Aharon. Aharon was the only one who could offer ketores and serve as the Kohen Gadol, and it couldn't be anyone else. For example, Korach, who was trying to get that position. The Ramban says the lo is referring to Elazar, Aharon's son, because Moshe had told Elazar to take the fire pans that Korach's followers had brought and tried to make an offering, and Moshe said to Elazar, take them and flatten them and put them on a covering around the altar, the outer altar, and that will be the memorial. That's what this pasuk is referring to. That outer covering from the fire pans will be a memorial and a reminder to everyone about this terrible incident with Korach and his followers. So this pasuk is very central to what the Zera Shimshon is going to talk about in this section, section 9, because the Chazal teach us when it says, don't be like Korach and his congregation, it means don't be a Baal Machlokes, don't be a person who causes arguments and divisiveness and strife, and that's what the Zera Shimshon is going to discuss. Okay, Os Test, section 9. V'al hai de amrinon b'Yerushalmi. On this that the Gemara Yerushalmi states, mutar lomar lashon hara. It is permissible to speak lashon hara, to speak slander, al ba'alei hamachlokes, on people who cause arguments, people who are divisive and cause disagreement and cause strife. The Gemara Yerushalmi says it's permissible to speak lashon hara about them. So the Zera Shimshon says, tzarich tam, we need some kind of reason. Lama kach, why is this? V'chi bishvil shehu chote, is it possible that just because a person is a sinner, meaning this Baal Machlokes, this person who goes around causing arguments and strife and divisiveness, is a chote, he's a sinner. But is it possible that just because he's a sinner, yihiyeh mutar lanu lahasos iser, that it's permissible for us to commit a Torah violation, to do something prohibited? Right? How would that make sense? Ulasaper lashon hara, and to tell gossip and slander about this person? We have a prohibition in the Torah. As a matter of fact, this prohibition is stated in the Torah in many different times in many different ways. Not to speak slander and gossip, not to speak lashon hara. So the Zera Shimshon says, How can it be that one guy who causes arguments and fights, that's really bad, but just because he's doing that terrible thing suddenly means that we're allowed to violate the prohibition, the strong, a multi-stated prohibition of lashon hara, of slander? Im hamesaper lashon hara onsho chomor yoser misholosh averos. We have to keep in mind that Chazal teach us a person who speaks lashon hara, his punishment is more severe than than a person who violates the three cardinal sins: avodah zara, giloy arayos, ushvichas damim, idol worship, and sexual immorality, and murder. And you can see in the parentheses that comes both from the Yerushalmi and from a Gemara and Arachin. So Chazal teach us, they make this incredibly powerful statement that from a certain perspective, a person who violates lashon hara is going to be punished in a worse way than a person who violates one of the three most serious averos, the most serious transgressions in the Torah, of idol worship and sexual and adultery and murder. And that statement itself, of course, requires analysis. But the Zera Shimshon is saying, speaking lashon hara is so terrible, how could it ever be permissible? Ucha'ilu kofer ba'ikar, and the Gemara in Arachin also says that a person who speaks lashon hara, it's as if he is denying the fundamental truths of the Torah, specifically denying God's existence. And the Gemara brings a pasuk from Tehillim to support that idea. So the Zera Shimshon is strengthening his question. He's saying, how is it conceivable that the Gemara Yerushalmi should say it's permissible to speak lashon hara about anyone? In this case, about a Baal Machlokas, a person who causes strife, because no matter how bad that person is, how could it ever be permissible to speak lashon hara about him when the sin of lashon hara is so serious and so severe? That's the question. Continuing down to the next page, column on the right. V'lichora hayanir elisaretz. Apparently, we might be able to give the following answer. Now, just to give everyone a little heads up, a little foreshadowing, the Zera Shimshon is going to propose two possible answers to his powerful question. He's going to show us why neither of them is correct, and then he's going to give his own third answer at the end. So now, here comes a possible answer. Imai di omrinon b'Yerushalmi depeya. Perhaps we can find an answer in a different statement in the Gemara Yerushalmi in the tractate of Peah. Shehamisaper lashon hara, the Gemara states there that a person who speaks lashon hara misalek hashchina lemala, causes the Shechina, the divine presence, to depart from our world and to go upwards, to go to the upper spheres. V'chein David, and similarly, or and so we find regarding David HaMelech, King David, kishero'a ma'aseh doeg, when he saw the actions of doeg, we'll talk in a moment about what that is, what that refers to. Ve'hazifim, and David HaMelech saw the actions of the Zifim. These are two examples brought in Sefer Shmuel about people who spoke lashon hara. In the first case of Doeg, with horrific consequences, and in the case of Zifim, they intended there to be bad consequences, but the bad consequences didn't happen. They didn't turn out. And again, we'll explain those episodes in a moment. But in any case, Zera Shimshon says, when David saw these people who spoke slander, who spoke lashon hara, Omar, he said, Ruma al Hashamayim. He said to Hashem, lift yourself up to the heavens. Klomar, meaning to say, Salek shechinoscha mi beinehon. Remove your divine presence from among people like this, who speak lashon hara. She'ein hashchina shore, because the divine presence does not rest mitoch sina ve'eva ve'cha'as v'sacharus. The divine presence doesn't rest where there is hatred and enmity and anger and strife. Rak mitoch shalom v'ahava. Only where there is peace and love. So let's go back for a moment to these two incidents. Doeg HaEdomi was a loyal subject, a loyal officer, a loyal follower of Shaul HaMelech, of King Saul. And at the time of the incident we're referring to, Shaul HaMelech was convinced mistakenly that David, who was not the king at that time, Shaul HaMelech, of course, was the first king over the Jewish people, was appointed by Shmuel HaNavi, and David was of a servant of Shaul's, but Shaul had become convinced that David was a rebel and that David's plan was to conspire against Shaul and ultimately to kill him and to even possibly wipe out his family. And so Shaul had set a goal for himself to capture David at the very least, and really to kill David. And that's what Doeg HaEdomi was attempting to do. He was a loyal follower of Shaul's, and he wanted to do everything he could to follow Shaul's wishes to eliminate David and to eliminate David's supporters. So in the incident referred to here, David was running. He was on the run. He was fleeing from Shaul and his army, and he came to a place called Nov Ir Kohanim. Nov, a city of Kohanim. This was a place where the Kohanim, many Kohanim lived and resided. And when David got there, he spoke to the head of the city, the Kohen who was the head of the city. And he said, he didn't mention that he was fleeing from Shaul. He just said, my men and I are moving fast, and we need food and we need weapons. And the head of the city thought that they had no reason to suspect that Shaul would have a problem with this. So he assumed that David was actually on a mission from Shaul. And so he gave David and his men food, and he gave David the sword of Goliath that had been stored there. And he did whatever he could to help them. Well, Doeg HaEdomi witnessed this, became aware of this, told Shaul that the Kohanim were rebelling in this city, were rebelling against him, which was completely fabricated and completely false. And he said, then the reason you know they're rebelling against you, Shaul, is because they gave David and his men food and weapons. And so Shaul said, go wipe them out. And Doeg committed the heinous, almost incomprehensible actions of coming and wiping out the Kohanim, the peaceful, peace-loving worshipers of Hashem who lived in this city. So David referred to that incident and said, and the Gemara tells us when David saw what Doeg did through his lashon hara, through his slander and his false stories that he shared with Shaul, and how that led to the death of all these innocent people. David said, Hashem, remove yourself. Your Shekhinah can't be around such actions. The Zifim were a group of people named after a forest that they lived in called Midbar Zif. And their act of lashon hara, when David was hiding in the area, they ran to Shaul and they said, we will turn over David to you. We'll tell you where he's located, and we'll help you capture him. And so David said that's another incident when Hashem should remove himself from among those people because they speak lashon hara. Now let's go back to the text. V'hoil shezeh kvar hu bal machlokas. And since this individual talked about in the very first paragraph, where the Yerushalmi says you can speak lashon hara about a bal machlokas, a person who causes arguments and strife and divisiveness, ve'ein hashchina imo, and we know that the Shekhinah is not with such a person. In other words, this person's actions cause the Shekhinah to not be around him because of all of his strife causing and all of his divisiveness that he causes. Mutter lomar lashon hara alav. Perhaps that's why it's permissible to speak lashon hara around him. Shel lashon hara zeh, because this type of slander that a person would say about the Baal Machlokes, lo yigrom siluk shechina. It won't cause the shechina to depart. Shekvar siluka ve'omedes, because the shechina has already departed and is standing away from this man. So this is the Zera Shimshon's first suggested answer to his original question, perhaps, and his suggestion is, his proposed answer is, since a Baal Machlokes causes strife and divisiveness and arguments, the Shekhinah certainly moves away from him. If the Shekhinah has already moved away from him, then perhaps it's okay to speak Lashon Hara about him, because our concern about Lashon Hara is that it causes the Shekhinah to go away, as David said, and the David HaMelech stated. So therefore, perhaps it's okay. Let's see why that's not a good, sufficient answer in the next paragraph. Aval mikol makom, but nevertheless, adayin lo yotzanu yedei chovosenu. With this possible answer, we have not fulfilled our obligation, meaning we haven't successfully answered our original question. She'im me'olav nistalka hashchina, because even if it's true that the Shekhinah has departed from this man, this Baal Machlokes, lo nistalka me'aleinu, it hasn't departed from us, meaning the regular people who are being told they can speak Lashon Hara about this man, the righteous people, the good people. The Shekhinah is resting among us, hopefully. Ve'ech hutar lonu, and therefore, how would it be permissible, lomar alav Lashon Hara, for us to speak Lashon Hara about this man? Halo b'sipurenu nigrom pegam lenafshenu chas v'sholem. Is it not true that with our speaking Lashon Hara about him, we will cause a terrible blemish, lenafshenu, on ourselves, God forbid? In other words, the Shekhinah might in fact have very sadly departed from this man, this Baal Machlokes, this man who's causing such problems in the community, but we, the hopefully good people, the Shekhinah hasn't departed from us. But if we speak Lashon Hara about the bad guy, then that is going to damage our neshamas, and it's could possibly cause the Shekhinah to move away from us, chas v'sholom. So that answer doesn't work. That doesn't explain why the Gemara Yerushalmi says, again, in the very beginning, that the Zera Shimshon opened with, that it's permissible to speak Lashon Hara about the Baal Machlokes. V'i mishum de'amrinon b'Yerushalmi depeya, and if we want to give another suggestion, it's because of something stated in the Yerushalmi, and also in Maseches Peah. This is the same location where that the Zera Shimshon previously quoted from. Top of the next column. Azhara l'lashon hara minayim. The Gemara there asks, where is the warning in the Torah that it's prohibited to speak lashon hara? And the Gemara answers with one of the many possible psukim. So the Gemara answers, Lo selech rachil be'amecha. Don't go as a talebearer among your people. Don't go around among the nation, among the community, among the people, and spread tales and slander and gossip. So that's the pasuk that is quoted. V'dafka b'misha ose ma'ase amcha. Perhaps it's only people who act like members of your nation, Osir l'chol lomar lashon hara alav, that it would be forbidden to speak lashon hara about such a person, right? The pasuk that the Gemara quotes is Lo selech rachil be'amecha. Don't go as a talebearer among your people. So the Zera Shimshon says, perhaps that pasuk itself is teaching us this lesson. You're only forbidden to speak lashon hara about people who act like members of the nation of Am Yisrael, and about them you can't speak lashon hara. Aval mi she'eino ose ma'ase amcha, but someone who does not act, does not follow the correct actions of your people, of Bnei Yisrael, mutter, perhaps it's permissible to speak Lashon Hara about such a person. So this second proposal goes right to the heart of the matter, right to the pasuk that the Gemara Yerushalmi brings to as the source for the prohibition of Lashon Hara, and it focuses on the word be'amecha, amongst your people, and the Zera Shimshon suggests maybe we're only forbidden from speaking Lashon Hara about people who act like good Yidden, good Jews, but someone who's a Baal Machlokes is a Chote, as the Zera Shimshon, he's causing the sin he's doing the sin of causing strife and arguments for no reason. Obviously, we're not talking about someone who has a disagreement that's L'Shem Shamayim, that's appropriate, that can sometimes happen, that's sometimes appropriate. But no, we're talking about someone who is purposely, is intentionally causing arguments and strife without a justifiable cause. So such a person is not acting like a good member of our Amcha, of our people, and therefore perhaps it's permissible to speak Lashon Hara about him. Dumya l'maydi amrina, and this would be similar to that which Chazal state in a Gemara in Yevamos, v'nosi ve'amcha lo sa'or, a prince among your people you should not curse. The Gemara there says, be'ose ma'ase amcha. We're talking about a leader, a prince, a leader who acts along in accordance with Amcha, the way that Jewish people are supposed to act. You should never curse a prince and a leader who acts like Amcha, who acts like an appropriate leader among the people. But if a person is violating the Torah, chas v'sholem, and that person wants to be respected like a leader among the people, that doesn't fly. That's not what the pasuk is saying. So the Zera Shimshon says, just like over there in the Gemara in Yevamos, they learn from the pasuk v'nasi be'amcha lo sa'or. You can't curse a leader, a prince, if he only applies if he's v'amcha, if he's acting like an appropriate Jewish leader. Perhaps over here you can't speak Lashon Hara only about a person who's acting like an appropriate member of the people. But if he's not, if he's a Baal Machlokes, perhaps it's permissible. So the Zera Shimshon says, in Cain, if so, if that reasoning is correct, my irya Baal Machlokes, why does the Gemara only state its rule that it's permissible to say Lashon Hara about a guy who's causing arguments, afilu l'shara veiros nami? The Gemara should have said anybody who is doing lots of transgressions and sins, since he's not acting like a good member of the people, of the nation, of Am Yisrael, you can speak Lashon Hara about him. But that is not what the Gemara in Yerushalmi in the very beginning in the first paragraph said. It specifically said a Baal Machlokes, a person who's causing all these arguments and strife for no reason, that's a person who you can speak Lashon Hara about. So again, the Zera Shimshon doesn't accept this second possibility. Now the Zera Shimshon is going to talk tachlis and give us his answer. Next paragraph. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, sheha iser shel lashon hara, the prohibition of speaking gossip and slander, hainu mipnei, it is because shehu matil sina umachlokes bein ha'ahuvim. When a person slanders and gossips, he is placing hatred. He's causing hatred and arguments between ha'ahuvim, people who got along, people who love each other, people who were fine, right? Lashon Hara, you have people who are, let's say you have two people who are friendly, neighbors perhaps, they get along fine. And now a person goes to one of the two, let's call that person Jim. He goes to Jim and he says, Jim, you know your neighbor Bob? Oh, he's a terrible guy. He did this and that. And suddenly Jim changes his whole attitude about his neighbor, Bob. He can't be friendly with him. He can't look at him without being suspicious because of the Lashon Hara that was shared with him. V'nikre soneh sholem, a person who speaks Lashon Hara is called a hater of peace. He's trying to cause problems. He's going around and and destroying friendships and healthy relationships and positive relationships with his slander and his gossip. Ve'im hu ba'al machlokes, and if we're considering the case of a person who causes arguments and is a ba'al machlokes, kfar hu sonei shalom, he already has shown himself, has demonstrated that he is a soneh shalom, a person who hates peace. He doesn't want peace and good relationships. He causes arguments and fights. That's how he gets his twisted gratification, by causing problems and causing arguments. So he's a soneh shalom. He hates peace. V'im kain, and if so, eino ro'oi leishev b'shalom. It's not fitting for him to live in peace. Dichsiv, as the pasuk in Yeshaya says, Ein shalom omar Hashem lo rishoyim. There is no peace, says Hashem, for the wicked, for the evil. V'lochein, and therefore, kedei shelo yeshev b'shalva, in order that this Baal Machlokas shouldn't live in peace and serenity, mutar lomar lashon hara alav. It's permissible to speak lashon hara about him. Kedei sheyisna'uhu, in order that he should be hated for his terrible, divisive actions. If he, God willing, will change his actions and he'll do tshuva, then of course this would change everything. The midah she'adam moded, and the way that a person acts, ba modedin lo. Chazal teach us, you can see in Maseches Sota, Chazal teach us the way that a person acts, that's the way that he is treated. That's referring, that Chazal is, statement in Chazal is referring to min hashamayim, the way that a person acts. That's the way that he's treated min hashamayim. We often shorten that expression to midah keneged midah. Hashem treats a person and deals with the person in accordance with that person's actions. So if they do meritorious actions, they are rewarded in accordance with their good actions. And if they do chas v'shalom evil actions, then they are treated in accordance with their evil actions. But here the Zera Shimshon tells us this man who's going around and causing strife and hates peace and doesn't want there to be peace and positive, good, healthy relationships between people, and does everything he can to destroy that and spread his machlokas, spread his arguments and his fighting and his strife. Such a person, we can speak lashon hara about him, and that's the Zera Shimshon now is answering his question from the first paragraph. Why is it permissible? Because such a person actually has caused so many problems that they don't deserve to live in peace, and therefore, when a person speaks lashon hara about him, if that causes problems and issues for him, it's justifiable. It's midah keneged midah. It's very important to emphasize, not just at this moment in this Zera Shimshon, but in general, the Zera Shimshon is not a sefer halacha. It's not a book of law. For example, the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, the Mishnah Brura. There are so many svarim that are books of halacha, meaning they were specifically written to teach us halacha, Jewish law. The Zera Shimshon was written in order to give us deep analysis based on the sources in Chazal and Midrashim of the Parsha of the week, of Psukim in the Torah. So it's important to know that if we shouldn't take this as a halachic statement that, the Zera Shimshon is teaching us that we're allowed to speak lashon hara about a Baal Machlokes. That is a statement that the Zera Shimshon brought from a Gemara in Yerushalmi. To know whether or not the halacha actually states that, you have to learn Hilchos Lashon Hara. You have to delve in to the actual laws of Hilchos Lashon Hara. Of course, we know, I mentioned the Mishnah Brura, the author of the Mishnah Brura, Yisrael Meir HaKohen, the Chafetz Chaim, wrote a sefer called the Chafetz Chaim. That's how he got the name, and many other works about the halachos of Lashon Hara. And so a person shouldn't assume from this piece in the Zera Shimshon and any other piece that, now they know the halacha. That is not the case, and the Zera Shimshon is not trying to teach us halacha, as we said, but a very fascinating look into the issues of lashon hara. And what we should take away from this piece is the seriousness of the aveira, how we have to avoid any kind of possibility of speaking lashon hara, of slander, of gossip, of saying negative things about people, because right from the start, the Zera Shimshon told us what a terrible, terrible aveira that is, and how in certain ways Chazal teach us that it's as if a person, God forbid, is kofar be'ikr. It's as if a person who speaks lashon hara is denying God's existence, God forbid, and it's as if a person is doing some of the most terrible, transgressing some of the most terrible prohibitions in the Torah. So coming away from this piece with those ideas and inspiring ourselves to do everything we can to avoid lashon hara, and we know Chazal teach us how difficult it is, how hard it is to really truly avoid lashon hara. That would be a wonderful thing to come away from this piece with. Yashar Koch for joining in the learning in the Zera Shimshon this week. We look forward, Be'ezus Hashem, with Hashem's help, to learning together again in the Zera Shimshon on next week's parsha.